Hi, thanks. My name is David. I'm from St. Anne's Church. I'm a catechist. I think today is really an eye-opener for me to see that so much has been done. So, actually, I do not have a question. I have a comment. One comment is that I think you need an integrated approach towards publicity, because you have done fantastic work. That I've been serving in church for about 3 decades already, and working very hard in church ministries. And then, wow, I look at what you have done. Hey, actually, I can tap on some of these resources, which I'm totally unaware of, and also government initiatives. And I'm really surprised that the government is doing so much for the poor and for the. I think publicity is key, because if there's one key takeaway for me today is that we have already done a lot, and we are already currently doing a lot, and we should publicize it more so that other parishes who have not sent representatives here will know what you're doing, and we can tap on your resources. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that comment. Yes, the gentleman behind.
I'm Stanley. Actually, this is more for John. I'd just like to hear the government point of view, or as a rep from the government. We understand what we learned today was we have needs. And yes, we have the various organizations, the church, addressing those needs. But what about that, the slide they mentioned about that, there's this growing self-centeredness among all of us, right? And self-centeredness unfortunately cuts through all classes. You can be poor and be self-centered. And it's same likewise, rich and be self-centered. So from a government point of view, or top-down level, how do we address this issue?
Great question, and a very difficult one, which thankfully John will answer.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay. So your question is, how do you work against self-centeredness, right? The question actually is, can the government do it? And not so long ago, in Parliament, someone raised the question of is there enough heart in public servants? And so, of course, that generates quite a bit of discussion internally and externally. And someone who has many years of public service said, you can deliver certain things with heart, and we should absolutely express empathy. But is it the government's job to ensure that there's heart? I would say that I think the government needs to create conditions for some of these things to come up. But it's the community that needs to then come forth. So it's two parts to this, because I think that in some ways, the government is, more specifically the political leaders. Sometimes we say, okay, they're almost like price takers. Society is willing to do certain things, and that's how policies get done. But actually, I tend to think of it as a more complex relationship. I think in some ways we are price setters, and in some ways we are price takers. And what you do now, you draw certain lines in society, and that steers society towards certain norms. And of course, there is this feedback system where you see what people are expressing, and you take that into account. And then it kind of just feeds on itself. So I do think that there's a role for government to play. So I talk about SG Cares. SG Cares is actually, there's this committee, everything is kind of committee, right? There's this committee that's 3 co-chairs. One is my minister, Desmond Lee. One is Minister Grace Fu for Community, Culture and Youth. And one is Speaker of Parliament, because he has a personal interest in this. But we can come up with the frameworks. And one of the big frameworks, one of the big elements is how can we get people to not just donate money, but put in more time in volunteering. We'll try to create the conditions, and then it's really for the community to come forth and to say, okay, I as an individual, I as a community body and collectively we come together to do it. So I think that government's role in this would be to create frames, would be to create opportunities, and to grease the wheels when needed. So one of the things that actually SGCAS has been working on is an app where you can match the needs with the supply of volunteers. Because people are willing to help, but what I find is corporations are saying, yes, I'm willing to sponsor something, I want to own something, right? I want to help with something, but what? So I think that one, government has a role and the community both have a role to play. And then, hopefully people will step up. Because otherwise, it's actually more efficient in many ways for government to just do it. And I don't think that that's the best outcome, because if I go back to, again, what will bring us forward in society and what is the hidden wealth of nations, it dictates that the government should not be the one moving to all spaces, because that will be to the detriment of the country. And I think, I truly believe that that is the case. So it's not absolving us from any responsibility at all, but just to say that we have different roles.
Phu Quang, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, okay. Just a short response, and I'm going to blame the government again. So, self-centeredness is, the opposite of self-centeredness, of course, is public-spiritedness, right? And I think part of the problem in Singapore, maybe not so now, because I think things are improving, but especially in the past, the government, we have a very dominant government that wants to do everything, and with the result that the people sector pull back. And especially in the early days, I think government was very ambivalent about the work of VWOs and social organizations. During the period when Singapore was still relatively young, vulnerable, and the government had very strong views about how some of these things needed to be done, and didn't quite, I think, appreciate the work of people from outside the government. There have been quite a few studies done about the level of civic mindedness and the vigor of civic society, for example, amongst different countries. One particular study I saw, when we compare ourselves with societies like, say, Taiwan and South Korea, our civic societies are not as vigorous and involved in as many activities as some of these countries, because in Singapore, people tend to expect the government to solve all the problems. So I think part of the response has to be that we have to develop a much stronger civic society so people take responsibilities for their action, whether in issues like environment or even helping the poor and needy and disadvantaged. And we need a stronger sort of people sector to take responsibilities for these things.
Thank you very much. And I'm sorry that, we really have run out of time. So I truly apologize. And, because I do this very often, I will just stop it here and now. So let me thank our panelists here. So will you please join me in giving them a round of applause? And I think Janet will now try to close it all up. And I will say, I think perhaps a closing point here will be for all of us to think about how we can be positive change agents in our individual capacities and within our organizations. So thank you everybody for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, panel. I now invite the panel to remain on stage as Janet gives them a token of appreciation.